Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I step off the train and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It's a lovely day here in suburban Chicago. The sun is out and it's surprisingly warm for early March. My phone says it's 66 degrees, which is probably 20 degrees warmer than it should be, but it makes for a nice walk home. Well, it's been a little while since I talked about some new games I played, so I thought I would talk about some new games I played. That's right, it's time for a board game espresso triple shot. It's funny, I make the latte noise. I don't generally drink lattes. I mean, I enjoy them just fine, but I prefer black coffee most of the time. So, anyhow. Well, today I thought I would talk about 3 new games that I tried in January of this year and let you know what I thought of them. So there might be some games from December that I haven't covered yet, but I can't remember off the top of my head, and so I thought I'll just jump into January. So the first game I'd like to talk about today is called Something Wild, Marvel Holiday Baby Groot. Now that is quite a mouthful, so let me break it down for you. It's called Something Wild, Marvel, Holiday Baby Groot. So there's 3 parts to it, and the idea is it is a flavored version of a game that they have a bunch of flavored versions of called Something Wild, Marvel. And the idea is it is a set and run taking game with a little bit of a scoring element, and this figure, that little tiny baby Groot figure that gets to move around and help you score points. It's a relatively simple game, not a lot to it, but amusing enough as a kind of sit around and play a game kind of game. Apparently it's part of a larger selection of games in the similar vein. Something Wild is the game title, and they have a number of different games with this flavor, both Marvel and out of Marvel, and you can mix and match them to make a more elaborate game. As I recall, there are a variety of scoring cards as well, and so different games will have different ways of scoring. But this is a very simple, very light game, meant to be family friendly and easily played by non-hobby gamers. So as a result, we found it just fine. It wasn't all that exceptional. It does come with a neat little tiny sized Funko Pop Baby Groot, which is fun. It's neat to have some of those. I do have one of those that I bought off eBay, a tiny fun size Varys, which I use in our copy of Hand of the King from Game of Thrones. I stole that idea from my cousin and her husband, who did the same thing. So, Something Wild, Marvel, Baby Groot was released in 2022, and it was published by Prospero Hall, is the designer, publisher, Funko Games. As you may or may not know, Prospero Hall is no longer a design studio. That all of the licensing that Funko owned for their game division, they sold to another firm, but apparently they did not also then sell the Prospero Hall design group, so it's been dissolved. My understanding is some of those designers have formed a new studio and will be releasing games soon under the same model. Next up, we have Vagrantsong. Vagrantsong is a boss battler where you have characters that are in a boss environment. They fight a boss character and then they go to camp and sort of refresh. The game is played over a series of it's like a campaign game played over a series of battles with the boss. Each round you go back to camp, you get more stuff, you go back and fight the next boss, and so on. The designers are Matt Carter, Justin Gibbs, and Kyle Rowan, published by Weird Games, that's WYRD, in 2023. Vagrantsong has a really great, or 2022 actually, excuse me. Vagrantsong has a really great art style reminiscent of old cartoons, like the Merry Melodies cartoons. A lot of younger people would call it the Cuphead style, sort of not recognizing that Cuphead is itself aping an older style. But there's a touch point for you if me saying the old cartoons that doesn't really mean anything for you. The premise of the game is that characters are vagrants, sort of hobos in the 1920s style or 1930s style, riding this ghost train, and the boss each round is a haint, which is an Appalachian word for ghost, and you have to try to defeat that ghost by beating it and it has different things it's trying to do. It's got a sort of set number of things that it does in a specific way. The players can, if you get defeated, you become a ghost yourself, and if you're still a ghost at the end of the game, you can lose some of your achievements, but you can be resurrected or brought back to the good side. I think the whole thing, we're already ghosts. We're on this ghost train, but you're sort of still half alive or something. It's a little unclear, but the theming is really strong in the game. The gameplay was fine. I enjoyed our first play of it. It was a little complicated, and I'm afraid we've let it go about a month now, a month and a half, and I'm afraid if we go back and play it again, I'm gonna have to like relearn the whole thing. It didn't stick all that well, and it wasn't super intuitive for me. But I love the theming, and I like the overall play of the game once we figured out how it worked. Like, it actually moves pretty quick once you know what you're doing. So we definitely are gonna play a few more times before we decide whether or not to keep it going. Although it might just be my wife and I playing. I'm not sure my son, we were gonna play it with him. I'm not sure he liked it. So, in terms of aesthetics, the game is really neat. Like I said, I told you about the style. The pieces themselves, the game comes with acrylic standees where the heroes are printed on opaque standees, so they look sort of solid. And the paints are all printed on these translucent standees with a kind of blue tint, like they're ghosts. That part works really well. All the tokens have these neat little icons that make it easy to understand what's going on. And the whole thing is very thoroughly themed. It's definitely a very thematic game and pretty neat. You do roll dice occasionally, so it isn't a Euro game, but I like that the actions are determined by how you choose to spend your tokens, and the enemy's actions get determined by pulling a token out of a bag. So it's a neat concept, and there are a lot of different scenarios. So if we play it again a couple more times and it really sticks, there's a lot of play to do. If it doesn't stick, it'll have been a bummer because I spent a fair amount of money on it. I bought it from the publisher at Gen Con, so kind of full price. And it's neat, but I'm not sure it was the best investment. We'll see. I'm looking forward to trying it some more. Still undecided on how much I like Vagrantsong. So next up, games dusted off. I only had one game dusted off in January, and I think I talked about that on an earlier podcast. That was City of Horror. So why don't I talk about Allow Me to Mansplain. Allow Me to Mansplain is a independently published party game. It was published by 4Y Games as the company. FOR space WHY, so 4Y. I followed the designer and publisher on TikTok, which is sort of where I found the game and got it. It's okay. I am not the target audience for this. I like party games just fine, but they're not my bread and butter. So perhaps that's part of it. But I will say we played it once. We thought it was fine. It kind of sat around for a year. I played it again at my board game club, and it did not go over very well. I think the idea of mansplaining a thing the group thought was funny, but ultimately it wasn't that fun, and I don't think I'll probably play it again. I think it's going to go on the sell or trade pile. It didn't help that the game doesn't come with instructions. You have to go online and look at them, and frankly they were not super easy to read on the fly. They were a little confusing, so that part didn't make it easier to play. I like this game in concept. In execution, it came up short for us. So that's Allow Me to Mansplain. I'll put a link to my original reflections on it. We'll see, maybe I liked it better last time we played. So that's the game I dusted off. It had been just over a year since I played it. Finally, the last game I'm going to talk about today is Nucleum. Nucleum is sort of the new hotness. It's from publisher Board and Dice, designed by Simone Luciani and David Turczi. Simone Luciani, of course, part of the Italian design group, best known for stuff like Barrage and I think Zolkin. David Turczi for a bunch of things. In my collection, his most prominent design is Anachrony. Nucleum is sort of it is a route building, resource management, board building, or empire building game. It feels like it's definitely in the neighborhood of something like brass. The big difference, or the big gimmick in this game, is that you have these action tiles that you use to take turns, and the action tiles have different things on them that you can do. So whenever you want to do an action, you have to have a tile that does that thing. One of the actions you can take is an action that lets you take more tiles, so you can expand your options, and usually the tiles you're taking are better than the ones you started with. They'll give you a couple different things you can do that are cheaper, or or perhaps give you some other efficiency as you're playing those. They vary in quality depending what you're leaning toward in the game. And then the clever bit is that when you're building routes, when you go to lay railroads particularly, you take the action tiles that you're using, you get to use them once more, and then you put them on the board and they're gone. So there's this push-pull of spending your tiles to put rails on the board, and the rails are essential for developing your different buildings, and then losing the actions that were on those tiles. As for the board itself, you are putting out tiles in the sort of style of brass. You have a player board full of tiles that you can put out, and the different tiles you put out are worth different points. And in order to use those tiles or score those points, you have to power them. This game is all about generating power, and you power them by connecting them to a power plant, spending the fuel that you need to spend, either coal or nuclear material, Nucleum, and then you get a certain amount of power based on a variety of different things you've put out on the board already. And if you have enough power to power your building, then you flip the building over and you score points. It feels very similar to taking the sell action in brass that lets you flip a tile over, but that's separate from the building action. This is sort of like a variation on that theme. The people I played Nucleum with thought it was really good, and I have played it a second time since then, and I think it is really good. It's very fun. I can't imagine turning down a game of Nucleum if I have the time and sort of bandwidth to do that. It does not supplant brass for me. I still think brass is a better game in either iteration, either Lancaster or Birmingham. But Nucleum is an interesting variation on it, and the action tiles are pretty interesting. It does make for a fun game, and unlike a lot of Simone Luciani games, you don't have to climb up any tracks, or at least not the same way. There are some achievements to get and stuff. There's plenty of scaling of bonuses and that sort of thing, but at least you're not climbing any tracks. So Nucleum, well worth checking out if you get an opportunity. I liked it a lot. The game design is pretty good. It's a little on the garish side, so if you have sensitivity to bright colors, maybe not for you, but otherwise really fun. Definitely worth checking out. I enjoy it. I don't see myself buying it, but I'm happy to play it when other people have it. That's Nucleum. That brings me to the end of my podcast today. Thanks for joining me on my walk. I hope your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.